Hi yogis, I'm Pippa. I work with Jeff Bailey, the founder of Avita Yoga, as his global support, you could say. I'm here to introduce today's Avita Yoga community chat, recorded live and now available to you here on YouTube. The Avita community chat is a free, informal and welcoming Q&A with Jeff, where students and teachers alike can bring their questions and learn from each other to deepen their understanding of the practice and their own bodies. In today's chat, some great questions come up about internal hip rotation and knee degeneration, leading to an in-depth conversation about general leg health. Jeff gives advice about how to deal with muscle and joint tightness with limited movement after surgery, and finally, the advantages of every so often taking a break from your practice. Now on to the chat. Enjoy.
Lynn, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Teaching in a Vita class, so yeah.
All right. How'd it go?
Wonderful. They're
Nice.
loving it, and I told them I have good news. Jeff's put out 5 classes that you can access, so I'm going to send that out later today, and they were excited.
Oh, all right. That's sweet. Thank you.
Well, I
Yeah.
only teach 1 day a week, so now I said, so you guys have no excuse now. You've got to start doing it more than once a week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'll come to you for the in-person juice. That's good.
Yeah.
And Dave, I remember on our last call, you had some stuff that you wanted to share that I'm not sure we ever got fully around to.
How can we best facilitate internal rotation of the hips?
How can we best facilitate it? Like what
Postures,
shapes?
yeah. What postures will put us for best in rotation of the hips? Because one, I had a busted femur, but on the opposite side, I have restrictions that's related to my ankle, but I want to work both bottom up and top down. So I want to start in the hips and move into in rotation. And I find that back in my previous life, PT, oftentimes in rotation, huge deficit in terms of movement, along with restriction and weakness in the in and out rotators. But first, would you please tell me postures for in rotation of the hips?
Mm-hmm. The first one comes to mind is the standing shape, where we stand. So I'm not in my studio, but it'll all come back to you as I just show you. It's the one where we stand like this, and you can have your legs wide. You can have the legs quite wide, but not so wide that you can't turn the heels out. And the heels turn out as a result. It's not just like I'm turning the heels out, but to some degree, the hips have to turn in to make that happen. So I'm like thinking of the legs as big cylinders and firming the thighs, moving the tailbone down. But see, you could also arch. Let the low back arch and sort of let the pelvis spill forward. But that doesn't tend to get into the part of the primary pattern that most people tend to have. So we firm the thighs, move the tailbone down, and then that rolls the pelvic bone, the pelvis, over the head of the femur posteriorly backwards. And then you can do it just mat width apart. You know, you can do it standing, and the firmness in the legs helps create the stability to turn, to get that internal rotation. Standing. Make sense?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So then, and this is the one that I often teach on the bolster. When you're sitting on the bolster, and then the foot is turned out like 90 degrees. I encourage a little mild flexion of the ankle as well, dorsiflexion. I like a little mild stabilization there in the ankle to help put a little integrity into the knee, because now the whole lower leg is acting like a big lever, turning the hip internally. And the limiting factor here for a lot of people is going to be some irritating sensation in the medial part of the knee, which I'm getting right now. And that's something that I've worked with for years. And it was at a point where like my first shapes were like this, you know, and the foot could be way out here, but so be it. You know, you start to gradually over time, and with, like, if I had a block or a bolster under me, then the shape would look different. For those who can do it on the floor, we do it with the elevation periodically so that you get the variation, because just lifting the hips here is going to bring a different approach into the joint.
I forgot all about the bolster. Bolster, a good position because that is in rotation.
Is this for you? This is for you because of you said you broke your femur. When did you, that's long ago, right?
Oh, when I was still in Arvada, I broke it probably 7 years ago, but it's on the opposite side. A long time ago, I didn't release out of my ski bindings, and I did a rotational. I had almost a fracture on my ankle, mid tibia, and fibula, and I've had restricted fascial motion for years. You remember how tight my frickin' feet were, and they still are, but they're improving as I improve my toes and ankles. I'm improving my knee and my hip, because it's a kinetic chain that starts with my heel strike. Yeah. Right. Back in the old analytical days. But one of the other question I'd like to dovetail to is, what's your feeling on the Asian squat, and incorporating that into, most of my students on Zoom can't get there, but we started moving from the full squat, moving into the Asian squat. And as I feel that is a tremendous movement at my ankle. It aligns my knee and my hip, but through my entire spine, as I sit into the depth of that squat, there's an elongation that must happen throughout my entire spine. And it's a wonderful feeling, even though I cannot achieve the full
What's the Asian squat?
It's just a full squat where your feet are turned out and your bottom is down. It's a rest position. It's a full weight-bearing load to knees, ankles, hips. But for me, there is also elongation through the pelvic floor. And so your thoughts on that, please.
Oh my God. Well, I've said over the years, physically speaking, we do Avita yoga for two reasons. One is to have a good walk, to be able to walk freely. The other is to be able to to sit freely. I'm going to give you three reasons. To sit in lots of different shapes, so we can sit on the floor, sit in a chair, sit comfortably. But ultimately, it's the squat. It's the long forgotten squat that shoes and, or not shoes, that's a different topic, but toilets and chairs and cars and buses have taken the requirement of it out of our life. Let me get some blocks here. So for some people, you know, we start where we need to start, and the support is necessary. Sometimes I'll teach it against the wall, so you have the wall for support as well. But then with time and with practice, we can start to work with less and less support. I have never, ever taught it without support. I think people naturally start to play with it, and I don't want to give people I just don't ever want to make a shape so challenging that people don't feel like they can do it. But you're right. We're just slowly moving away. We diminish the support, and you're right. It's beautiful compression on the knees, on the ankles, the hips, the groin. It requires the lumbar spine and the whole back side to release. It's the shape. Some degree of the shape is what we had to do for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years in order to relieve ourselves.
Right. Right.
And there's even, you can go online and get little platforms that go on either side of the toilet so you can simulate a squatting shape, because if you look at the anatomy of how we eliminate, whether it's a turd or a baby, sorry, you know, the anatomy of a squatting shape facilitates all that. So I only mention that because it's evidence that supports the shape itself and why it's worthwhile to work toward it. And so for me today, I can take that out, but I'm using some shin muscles to maintain the shape. And since I had my little accident back here when I ruptured my Achilles tendon almost exactly 2 years ago, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to do this again, but I've worked at it, and it's a little different than it was before, but I've got it back. And with just a little effort these days, it takes a little effort. But you're right, eventually we can have it with feet out, but ultimately we should be able to have it with toes pointing straight ahead as well. It's all variations in the hip.
And from that position, we can also work on chin retraction, which will get us greater elongation through our entire spine. And we can also start to begin moving some scapular pullbacks, which will start to engage and elongate this entire fascial plane from our chin to our sternum.
Yeah. I think what I hear you saying there is the fact that this shape has so much flexion on the body, so much flexion. And then when you retreat the chin,
yes,
and sometimes you can even use your hands on the knees or elbows, and then you can get that lengthening quality through the spine. Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. Because as we're sucked into hyperspace, we flex forward, right? And we, or for me, back in the PT world or in the Avita world, I want elongation and opening, which opens up throat chakra, which opens up chest and heart, which opens up my spine, and my ribs must out rotate, gives me greater lung excursion, hinges my respiratory diaphragm, and has less compression to my abdominal viscera. And I just been playing with this, and I think the squat is
squat's where it's at. I opened my class today with it. Check out today's class. I taught it this morning. I opened with the squat at the wall, and then I moved into a whole bunch of shapes throughout the class that were variations on the squat. I even referenced that a couple points in the middle of the class. But yeah, you're right. The squat is sort of a telltale sign. You know, back in, I guess, when we were kids, they had the presidential fitness thing, and you could do all these things to see if you were in fit. And you probably know them better than I do. I'm sure you do. The different flexibility tests, like how far does your neck turn? Can you touch your toes? And all that. And all of that, I think we don't hear much about that anymore, but it pales in comparison. Just deep flexion and yes, elongation. And most of the yoga these days is all about lengthen, but not at the expense of good compression, and flexion. They're opposite sides of the same coin, and we want it all.
Yeah, we want symmetry within the movement patterns. But as you've analyzed movement patterns throughout your life, I think most of us are just in the position of ease, which is flexion, because we're sucked into hyperspace and we're on our phone or we're on our computer. But go ahead.
Well, we do get sucked into flexion, but is it full flexion?
No.
So we get sucked into that sort of a static quality, which is where patterns start to build, and then the pattern feeds the thing in the form. And
I agree. It's not full flexion, and that compression to joint surface is crucial for stability of joint because it engages the entire circumferential surrounding ligament, musculature, nerve, artery, vein,
Oh my
lymphatic
God.
system, the whole gizmo. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many doctors and physical therapists out there would echo what you just said? We just don't have a paradigm for that. It's all about muscle, 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 and flexibility and strength. And so this whole method is a way to get through the muscles actually and get to that deep infrastructure that you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, this is the juice of the whole practice that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool.
Well,
and one more thing.
Oh, go ahead.
All I wanted to do is before we dropped off here is I wanted to show you. So if there's a lot of restriction in the hip, and you're working toward this internal rotation. See, I've got this hand way out here. My knee is almost 90 degrees and the knee is dropping toward the floor. So this is internal rotation. This could be a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually pretty close to the standing shape. This is a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around, but if I lie back like this, now my torso is in the same plane as my right leg. I'm almost the same as standing. And now I'm internal rotating. So I got internal rotation, but now we also are bringing the hip into extension with it. And then, so there's points in between. You can support on elbows. I sometimes will teach this with the elbows on the bolster. And you can also do it completely reclined with your whole, laying all the way on your back and then bringing the heel out. So this would mimic, I see Charlie, this would mimic a standing internal rotation. Whereas sitting, like you see a lot of kids sitting, and I used to be able to do it as a kid until enough grown-ups told me not to sit this way. A lot of kids sit this way, and it would be a problem if it's the only way you sat. But the really savvy parent would say, okay, sit that way, but now turn your toes in, wrap them around the back of your tailbone, and then you don't get any funny shaping in the hip, because the hip will literally change shape according to the pressures that we put on it. So lots of approaches, and so you have to meet the stiffness with, and this is another theme that came through in today's class, without the goal of necessarily advancing the shape. I can't tell you how important that is. It just keeps coming in more and more and more. The moment your mind goes to advancing the shape to make it better is at the moment we no longer are doing yoga. We're doing something else. Shapes change as pleasant surprises.
Can I ask a question, Jeff?
Yeah.
Are we done with this? I mean, this was
I bet
really
we'll come
helpful.
back to it, but go ahead.
This was really helpful. Thanks, Dave. That was
good questions.
Yeah. I was skiing the other day, so I've been skiing on my knee 5 times, and that's exciting to me.
Yay.
Can't ski all day, but I'm hopeful. And I went out with a ski instructor, and I've known that this is a pattern of mine, a valgus knee kind of. And when I learned to ski years ago, you skied with your feet wheeled together and your knees together. And and he just pointed out that habit of mine. And so now he's like, you need to be more in an athletic stance.
That was popular in the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's when I learned to ski. And
he
really said with your shaped skis, that posture is not helping you. So you need to learn this athletic stance, feet shoulder width apart, blah, blah, blah. But my knees though cave in all the time. So the exercises when PT, the clamshell and just squat and just.
You mean your knees? They it's valgus, right? They come together like that,
right? Yeah. So my feet can be hip width apart, but my knees are kind of more moving together, and it's a habitual pattern. I've kind of known I've had it. So I've got some excerpts, what would you say, what is an Avita perspective on that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're going deep here today. This is good. So, when the knees close in like that, you could say it's the opposite look of bow-legged, right? When the knees come in, then the pressure distribution through the knee changes. More than likely, the pressure increases on the medial meniscus, on the inner part of the knee, and it decreases on the lateral part of the meniscus. Would you agree with that, Dave?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So it's pure physics. Now, there's probably also part of that patterning is in the hips, because the hip will literally start to change shape a little bit to or the pattern could have started in the hips. A hip limitation starts to push the knees into that shape. Or who knows, it could have been like this pattern that came in at birth. Regardless, we also have to look to the whole body to resolve it, kind of like what Dave was saying before about his ankles and his feet and lower legs. So in terms of Avita, now, this is something I covered in the knee workshop recently. It is oftentimes the part of the knee that doesn't get the pressure that develops the arthritis. Use it or lose it, right? The degeneration happens in the cartilage and bones that don't get adequate pressure and compression. So if you're walking through life, you don't even have to be a skier. You can walk, you can run, you can jog, you can ride your bike, all these things. And the medial part of your knee is getting the majority of the pressure all the time, while the lateral part is kind of not having contact. Think of a door hinge where part of the hinge is touching and part of it is not. And so there's this load distribution that's not less than ideal. So what do we do? Well, didn't know I was going to be doing this much yoga today in this. So one thing is, when we have the Sukhasana shape, there is considerable work on the knees in Sukhasana, because as gravity moves my knees down here, there are very unusual and atypical pressures coming into the knee. And then as I curve forward, any limitation in the hip, as I start to curve forward, gets pushed into that limitation in the knee, whether it's medially or laterally. So Sukhasana can be helpful for that, because what are we trying to do? We're not going to fix the knee. We're not going to rebalance it out per se. All we're trying to do is get pressure into this part of the knee where it's been lacking. So Sukhasana is one way, and then all the variations on Virasana are the big ones. So we have, the knees and the feet hip width apart, and we sit back into that space. There's compression in the knee. Then when we turn the toes in and bring the knees out wide and we sit back, that is a different approach into the knee and the hip and the feet and ankles. There's the one where we squeeze together, keep the heels touching the whole way and slowly sit back. And then, of course, there's exactly what Dave was asking about. Okay. When I mentioned the pressure that I sometimes feel in the medial part of my knee here in this shape, I honestly, and maybe Dave, you have some ideas on this. I don't really know. And I think it could vary from person to person. Where's the pressure going? Is the pressure actually going into the medial part, or is the pressure going into the lateral part? Just because I feel this pinch in the medial part, I don't know if it's being opened up a little tiny bit or being compressed a tiny bit. And some of that is definitely coming from any kind of ankle and hip rigidity. So this shape right here that kind of might be a theme for this for this talk and this practice today. Yes, it's internal hip rotation, big time. But it can also be remarkably healing for the knee. You just have to really pace and go slow with it. I have no attachment to advancing the shape. So there's this, which is specifically good for addressing this imbalance that the valgus knees bring. And then while I'm here, there's, just really focusing on one knee at a time. So it's just all the different versions of compression and all the strap work in extension. Heels out, all the different ways to get into the knee. And I think you would start to get some unique sensation, because Lynn, I think you're asking this question so you don't have to have your other knee operated on, right? So how do we get into those parts? So I would just take what we've talked about here today, along with the strap work, and you'll know when you're accessing the degenerated part of your knee. Is it in fact the lateral part of your knee? Do you know where the degeneration is?
Not on my right knee, really. My left knee, it was that I had replaced. It was the medial that had crushed was more. It was like the medial
It's just
part
been worn down.
Yeah.
And that's the thing there may not be as much arthritis there. There could be, but that's just overworn. It's just worn it down. So it's everything for your left knee. I would just be doing lots of homework. You do a class, and then daily, just about daily, you're doing the compression, the virasana, and the strap work. Yeah.
Thank you.
All the different variations. I had a longtime student who did a partial knee replacement many years ago on both knees, because she had something similar. And it's like, okay, I don't need to replace my whole knee. Let's just do a partial. But I have a feeling they're not doing so many partials or not doing so many partials anymore, because now you have metal and plastic on half of the knee that's really never going to wear out. It just seems to me that it's going to be really tricky to get the pressure distribution once you have a partial replacement. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. There's a lot of probably details that I'm completely unaware of, but from what I've seen and what I do know, I would advocate a whole knee replacement over partial. I think most partials are going to turn into fulls eventually.
That's what he doesn't really do hardly any partials anymore, because he goes, your whole knee is not good. So
yeah, it's like remodeling a house when you probably should have just started fresh. Wow, great questions. I feel like we're in a teacher training.
Just from our years of observation, Lynn, I would highly encourage you to be aware of your ankle motion in all planes, because as we walk, we hit our heel first, and that oftentimes the lack of, we've talked about the term dorsiflexion, right, Jeff? Mm-hmm. It is the ankle up motion, and that just make sure you have really good movement into dorsiflexion, and that so the ankle movement, knee is, from my perspective, really important.
Yeah, the knee is sort of the more vulnerable of joints, and it gets stuck between a stiff ankle and a stiff hip. That makes it particularly, vulnerable to some issue. Flexible ankles, flexible hips, healthy knees. Emerson, what a pleasant surprise to see you on.
Yeah, I just finished. I'm a chemical engineering PhD student, for people who don't know, and I just submitted my first author paper. So I'm taking the day to just do nothing productive at all. Beyond just
Oh, wait a
like
minute,
whatever
you're here with
strikes my
us.
fancy. Whatever strikes my fancy, right? So I
Yeah.
decided to pop on here when I got the email.
Nice.
I do have a question for you, which I tried to swing at you before, so I'll try it again.
Okay.
I just had chest vascularization surgery. It's basically kind of the equivalent of a double mastectomy. And I am stuck for 6 months without being able to raise my elbows above my shoulders, which, as someone who works at a desk a lot and has a lot of back stiffness and muscle pain, has been pretty counterproductive, because I used to at least like stretch my arms over my shoulders and kind of like do a lot more like backward movement with my shoulders and stuff, and everything is pretty tight across my chest. So I'm wondering if you have suggestions for just increasing flexibility, but also kind of reducing some of that tension that I get from lack of, sometimes lack of movement. And now I'm having, to be careful with how much exercise I do, and I have to be careful about how much I'm, how far up I move my elbows.
Yeah.
And so
No, I'm so glad you jumped on. I do have some ideas.
Stiffness.
Yeah. Yes. So how many more months do you have to go before you can put your arms overhead?
4.
Okay. So 4 months, you're 2 months in, and they don't want you doing that because
my scars run across this way. So the more that I lift my arms, the more stretching of my scars that I'm going to get.
Yeah. So you want this area where basically where the surgery happened here to be stable and healthy and unstretched.
Yeah.
Okay. This is something that I learned when I was recovering from my ankle injury. They told me no dorsiflexion. Like I could point my foot, I could do this with my foot, all I wanted. They said, just do tons of that, but do not stretch your calf muscle. Don't go the other way. Being who I am and being an Avita teacher and everything, I tested that a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. I'm not advocating that. I'm just giving a backdrop to what I'm going to tell you here in a little while. And let me just repeat, I tested it in a really minute way, in many ways just out of curiosity. But I could feel the stiffness in my calf. And I knew that the calf muscle and getting it to work a little bit and kind of release was perfectly fine. But the last thing I wanted to do is interfere with the stitches and the things that are down in the tendon itself. So I just became keenly aware of any sensation there that could be completely off limits. So now with that little backstory, you can say, whatever movements I do, I want to be keenly aware of any kind of stress or strain that you're putting in this safety zone. So you can have your hands out here, right?
Yeah.
And you can, so with this movement in this area, eating, drinking, no problem.
Right.
So the first thing that came to mind is with and without a strap, and I'll even use a block here because I have a block, is lying on your back.
Okay.
And just going into, okay.
Yeah.
So this is just like sitting, except you're on your back, right? And this is just like putting your hands out in front of you, telling you not to go.
Yep.
Right? So
yes. Sorry.
That's all right. That could be the extent of my work. That could be the extent of what you do. You're in this safe zone, you're squeezing, you're working your hands, your triceps get to engage. That could be it. And you're tuned into this area, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 inch at a time like I'm saying, on a day one, you're here. The whole next day or 2 days later, you're there, and then you test a little more. When I say test, I hope you understand what I mean. It's just, I don't know any other word that just where we just gradually work into some new sensation. It's mostly your shoulders, just like my calf muscle and my knee that we're kind of jonesing for the movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking for just, shoulder movement, upper back movement. I'm so tight. And I'm struggling to find ways to,
Yeah. So that's one. You could do the same thing with the strap. You remember the strap work that we did? You kind of a tearing action on it. And then you just got to know that anything past when you open your eyes and see your hands, anything past your nose is going to start going overhead. And you could have a lot of fun and feel a lot of benefit just working in that safe zone. And then you can open the strap out to just folding it halfway so your hands are wider, and then you're working out here. And then you can lay them on the floor and do this.
Oh yeah, that's particularly hard because I've tried laying on my back and I can only bring them up to like here.
Okay, but see, you're making the mistake that a lot of people make, and that is, if I said, like what I just said, if I said bringing your arms out to the side and like 90 degrees, that's too much. It's off limits. So they're at 45.
Okay.
The one skill we learn in Avita Yoga is how to discern what healing sensation is. So if you're lying on your back and your arms are out, maybe let's just say 10 to 15 inches from your side, you're more at 45 degrees than 90. You wait, you rest, you relax. What do you feel? Is there strain where it shouldn't be? Here across your chest? Or is it in your back and your shoulders? That's what we got to work with. So you just hang out there. You can put a bolster lengthwise. I'm going to put 3 blocks lengthwise. Okay, so I'm sitting on the end of the bolster. There's also sitting on the floor near the end of the bolster.
Okay.
So you can play with that because this is going to get into your back and shoulders. But you lie back. The head can be, I typically teach having the head supported and then moving back so it's less supported.
Okay.
But it's all working with the resistance and making sure it's healing sensation and not pain. And your arm may be down here. Once you elevate like this, it's going to be even more demanding to come up. So you just work down here and know that you're mostly working on mobility for your spine and your upper back and letting your ribs start to move on your back side. And then there's everything that we've talked about already here. Sukhasana. Anything. You see Sukhasana curving forward. Now you get the spine going in the other direction. Your hands are in the safe zone.
Yeah, this is all really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a lot of things in a regular class that you can do. And you're staying in that realm of safety, having no doubt that you're working with healing sensation and not testing. You're not really testing this. You're testing everything else as a result of making sure you don't interfere with this.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate it. Thanks.
For sure. Yeah, it's great. Well, we kind of hit our time limit. Jean, did you have any specific questions?
No, I really just I had kind of a rough fourth quarter and didn't get a lot of Avita done, and just want to kind of jumpstart today by, kind of getting back in and listening to some Avita chat. And the only comment I would make is when you take, I'm really experiencing a lot more sensation after pretty much not doing Avita for 2 to 3 months, and it's really it's discouraging now, but it encourages me to not take any big breaks again. So because it's hard to work my way back in. But no, I was just lurking here to try to get back in the routine.
Yeah. Okay. I'll make one comment on that, and then we'll wrap it up. From someone who practices almost every day, I can say that there are times when I will purposefully just give it a break. And now that I'm teaching on the camera, I don't really get to do that so much anymore. But whenever I would teach, I would make myself take a break, just to have a break, but also to. This may sound really strange, but I do believe it. To let your body stiffen up a little bit, just to let the stiffness come in, because we don't want to have a fight, and to let it come back in and start anew. You sort of start fresh, and you go slower, and you don't deepen into the shapes. And I'm experiencing that right now like never before. This has been nearly a month away from my practice. I did tiny bits here and there. And even when I had opportunities on the road, I would just say, you know what, I'm just not going to push my practice. So it's been a whole month, and I'm slowly getting back in, and it's changing. I'm feeling the releases, but what I'm doing is relishing the stiffness.
Yeah. Well,
I'm relishing the limits. It's like starting as a fresh baby.
One of the most difficult things is to do. So it was good reinforcement today to not try to get back where I was, to not try to advance the shapes back to where I was when I took the break. So so that's really good advice for me too. Yeah,
just enjoy these new sensations that are coming up. That isn't that interesting? And it's really kind of fun.
Oh yeah, I'll try to change my attitude. Okay.
Yeah. All right. This was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
See you next time. All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hello again. If you enjoyed today's chat, please share it with friends and family and subscribe to the Avita Yoga YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. If you have a question for Jeff and the Avita community, or know someone who does, why not join a live chat? They're on the first Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. You'll find the link in the episode notes. Thanks for listening.